Everyone. Welcome to our today's discussion. My name is Puyan Kimiai-Jan, a research fellow at the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy. This is our fourth virtual panel discussion we're hosting since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope you, your family, and loved ones are safe and healthy. We have a timely discussion today about Canada's bid to join the United Nations Security Council, especially with the vote expected this Wednesday on June 17th. We have a lot to discuss, and we have a great panel of experts to discuss all this. For about 40 minutes, I will have an initial discussion with our panelists, and then I will hear some of your questions. Please use the Q&A function on Zoom to send in your questions. Before I introduce our panelists, I will talk briefly about our institute. The Institute for Peace and Diplomacy is a Canadian nonprofit and nonpartisan organization that is dedicated to promoting peace and constructive dialogue and engagement in world affairs. With our research publications and panel discussions, we hope to positively contribute to the foreign policy discussion here in Canada. Our vision is to build a strong grassroots think tank that empowers progressive policymakers and peace advocates with independent research and analysis. We are dependent on donations of our supporters. If you want to support us, please visit our website at peacediplomacy.org. Among our audience today, we have researchers, journalists, former and current diplomats, many policymakers, and business leaders. To everyone tuning in, thank you for your attendance, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. I want to now briefly introduce our distinguished panelists today. Dr. Adam Chapnick is a professor of defense studies at the Royal Military College of Canada. He is based in Toronto, where he also serves as a Deputy Director of Education at the Canadian Forces College. He has an MA in International Affairs from Carleton University and a PhD in History from the University of Toronto. He's an award-winning author and editor of 8 books and over 50 academic essays and book chapters on Canadian foreign affairs, Canada's relationship with the United Nations, Canada-US relations, and on teaching and learning. He has appeared as a foreign policy expert in print media and on television. Dr. Chapnick has also testified as an expert witness before the Standing Senate Committee on National Security and Defense. Between 2013 and 2015, he co-edited International Journal, Canada's leading journal of global policy analysis. We also have Ms. Peggy Mason. From 1989 to 1995, she was a former ambassador to the United Nations for disarmament. Since 1995, Ms. Mason has been involved in UN peacekeeping training. She has developed principles on disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of former fighters. She has also worked on reforming UN arms embargo and UN peacekeeping in the 21st century. Ms. Mason is now the president of the Rideau Institute, an independent nonprofit think tank focused on research and advocacy in foreign, defense, and national security policy. Ms. Mason brings a progressive voice to issues ranging from the importance of nuclear disarmament to the imperative of UN conflict resolution, appearing regularly in print media, on television, blogosphere, and radio. As well as she has also appeared before the Foreign Affairs and National Defense Standing Committees. Thank you to both of our distinguished panelists for participating in this panel. To start the discussion, I would like to ask each of our panelists to give us their assessment on Canada's bid to join the United Nations Security Council. Since coming into power, the Trudeau government has been consistently campaigning for this seat. And I wanted to ask, has this campaign been successful so far? And we can start with Adam, and then Peggy, you can say it.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all of you for tuning in. So has the campaign thus far been successful? Well, the first thing to say is we will not know until the vote on Wednesday. And we know that delegations lie, so whatever we're thinking, there will be surprises, as there always are when this vote comes through. I would say that this campaign has certainly improved significantly over the last year or so. I don't think it started very well. Canada, never before in its history has Canada imposed itself on an already contested UN Security Council election campaign. Our general foreign policy is that we don't want to have a contested election. We don't want to have to go solicit votes from countries that may not be friendly to us in order to get a seat on the council. It's better that there be two candidates from our group that have two seats. So we've never jumped in like this. So I didn't think that was a great idea. It meant that we were campaigning from behind from the beginning. And then when the US administration changed, we changed our focus from the campaign to Canada-US relations. I think since the government was reelected, the campaign has been significantly more focused. The foreign minister we have now is securely focused on winning a seat. There is more coherence between the Prime Minister and the Canadian ambassador in New York. It helps, I think, that COVID requires a lot of money from the international community, and Canada has that kind of money. It's easier for us to demonstrate our value in the world right now. So I think the campaign has certainly improved. It didn't start the way that it probably should have.
Okay, thank you. Peggy?
Yes, well, first let me say thank you very much, how pleased I am to participate in this debate. And your question in a nutshell, were we right to launch this campaign? What chance do we have? How are we doing? I think, I mean, we have been in contested campaigns before, but as Adam said, this is the first time we've come in so late. Ireland launched its campaign in 2005 and Norway in 2007. And we launched ours in 2016. And we launched it knowing that Ireland and Norway were the other candidates. So, you know, to speak diplomatically, we were ill-advised to get into a race with those two as the competition. And, the only wild card here, and Adam has mentioned it, is really COVID diplomacy. Because on every other scale you want to measure, we come up short with respect to Canada, to Norway, and to Ireland. I mean, if we take one of the most important areas, and this still is for COVID, foreign aid spending, notwithstanding the money that we've ponied up recently, we're way behind. I mean, Norway's above the gold standard of 0.7% of GNI. It's at 0.94%. Ireland's at 0.31%, but Canada's back at 0.25. In fact, we're either the same as or slightly lower, maybe now slightly higher because of the COVID money, as during the Harper era. So there's no competition with respect to and that matters. That matters for developing countries. And that matters now, of course, too. And then if we want to look at an area where Canada's talked a good line and where we used to make a huge contribution in respect of UN peacekeeping. I mean, Ireland and Norway never left UN peacekeeping. And now Canada says it's going to come back, and we have done certain things, but way, way below what would be a real commitment. And then if we look at another area that matters in the voting, and this played a role in our unsuccessful 2010 campaign, and that is Canada in this extraordinary situation. I say extraordinary, never would have happened, would have been unthinkable back in the days when I was ambassador, and for many years after that. Canada voting with United States, Israel, and sometimes the Marshall Islands on UN resolutions where the entire rest of the UN is voting in favor or abstaining. And I'm talking, of course, about Palestinian rights under international law. And those votes often contradict Canada's stated policy. So isolating ourselves in that way, when we're a self-declared champion of international law, and yet our voting record at the UN doesn't reflect that. And of course, Ireland and Norway not doing that. And then in another very relevant area, and this is COVID related, UN Secretary General has launched a very high profile campaign to try and get United States to at least suspend some of the worst sanctions of its, US calls them sanctions, they're actually illegal economic countermeasures against Venezuela, Iran, and Cuba, which are making, Iran has called it medical terrorism because it has prevented Iran from these illegal economic countermeasures prevented Iran from getting medicine and other equipment. And Canada has not joined in the UN Secretary General's call for the lifting of those sanctions. And that, of course, touches on, and we'll no doubt have more to say about this, another point that Adam made about, you know, the Trump, the wild card, the US. How independent, I mean, if other countries are trying to assess Canada, how independent is Canada going to be? Our survival technique since Trump has been elected, given the fact that 80% of our exports go to the United States, has been to keep our heads down and avoid any public disagreement with Trump. Well, when you're on the Security Council, you got to stand up and vote. You got to stand up and be counted. And we don't know what's going to happen with respect to the American election. You know, we can hope. A lot of us can hope fervently. But in the meantime, when those votes are cast by UN member states, they've got to ask themselves, how independent is Canada going to be? How useful is Canada going to be? So against all that is the COVID diplomacy. Have we, you know, has that shaken things up? Or will countries say, well, you know, is Canada going to help us? Because of course, Ireland has a higher percentage of its economy, of its GNI that it gives to aid. But of course, dollar for dollar, it can't touch us. And that's who we're competing against, is Ireland, because it's common, it's accepted that, you know, that Norway is in. But to Canada's credit, our COVID diplomacy has not been kind of focusing specific dollars at specific countries. It has not been vote buying. To Canada's credit, our COVID diplomacy has been to support global campaigns and global measures to ensure that developing countries are fairly treated and have fair access to the vaccines and have fair access to the equipment and so on. So ironically, you know, we've done the right thing. We've taken the high road with the COVID diplomacy. Now, it is possible that some countries may say, oh, well, with Canada on the Council, Security Council, they're going to want to keep up that high profile. They're going to want to keep up that COVID diplomacy, because let's face it, this is going to go on for a long time. And so that might be part of the equation of some countries. But all of which to say, you know, if you gave me $1 million and you said you got to put it, you know, you got to put it on one side or the other for Canada, I'm afraid I would not be putting my money on. You know, I regret it, but I regret it very much. But I don't think I'd be putting my money on Canada.
Thank you for your great take. I now have 2 questions, and these questions are related to our panelists' area of expertise. And I'll start with Adam. With respect to your work on Canadian foreign policy, having researched the history of Canada's contributions to the United Nations, has the Trudeau government done enough to engage with the United Nations and fulfill its promise to bring Canada back to the world as an international player? What is your take on that?
Okay, so that's an interesting question, because it can be looked at 2 ways. Has the Trudeau government done enough based on what it promised, or has it done what it takes to secure election on the Security Council? They might be 2 different things. I think this government, if it's guilty of anything, it's guilty of inflating expectations beyond any realistic sense of what Canada can and cannot achieve on the world stage. The Trudeau government, before they were the Trudeau government, they were the third party, and third parties in elections tend to make oversized promises, especially when it comes to world affairs where they don't have access, because they don't have the top secret clearances, to a full understanding of what's really going on in the world. As a result, I don't think any government could have fulfilled the promises that this government was making coming into power. But at the same time, I think that the government's first 4 years, they were still trying to figure out what real brand they wanted for Canada. Canada's back, what does it mean? So we convened conferences on women in international security through peacekeeping. We convened conferences on sustainable public finance, I think. We convened a whole bunch of conferences on a whole bunch of different things. We spoke about a feminist foreign policy, and then the lead speaker of the feminist foreign policy was shifted to deputy prime minister, and we haven't kept that. So at one level, I think the expectations were unrealistic. What I think the government's doing right now is far more impressive. And that if you listen to the ambassador, what he is speaking about is Canada's role as a global convener. In other words, we have the heft and the bulk and the relationships to convene large groups of countries to rescue a multilateral system which is really struggling right now. Because we are a member of the G7 and the Francophonie and the Commonwealth and just about every other international organization out there, we have the connections to bring countries together in ways that other countries cannot. And so this idea of Canada as global convener, I think, is quite appealing both to Security Council voters and to anyone with a history of studying Canadian foreign policy in terms of what we can actually do effectively. So again, my answer is yes and no. Thank you.
I also have now a question for Ms. Mason. For years, you worked on non-proliferation and representing Canadian views on critical issues at the United Nations, particularly on disarmament. If Canada secures a seat on the Security Council, how can it use this opportunity to expand on non-proliferation, given that one of its main UNSC campaign promises is to sustain peace on the global stage and work on conflict prevention? What is your take on that?
Thank you very much for that question. You'll forgive me, though, I just have to have a very, very quick response to a couple of things that Adam said. First of all, I don't think they overpromised, and I think the very clear example is peacekeeping. There's no reason at all why Canada cannot do what it promised. It promised 650 troops. I mean, this is not a hard thing for Canada to produce. We promised a quick reaction force. Mali is crying for a quick reaction force, and we haven't delivered it. So I don't think we overpromised. I think we made good promises and we under delivered. But the more important point is, because the global convener function is a very important one, but it has nothing whatever to do with being on the UN Security Council. We can play that role. We have played it, and we can play it in future, but it's not a UN Security Council role. So having said that, I mean, we can do it just as well and probably better by not, because when you're on the UN Security Council as a non-permanent member, the resources and the focus that it takes is extraordinary. So it takes away from other foreign policy areas you might want to pursue. But now getting to the very, very good question, and I thank you for that. Again, I have to be, I don't like being this negative. But yes, it's absolutely true. Canada's made sustaining peace one of its 5 themes, and that's most welcome and very, very important. But in its description, in its elucidation, in its campaigning on sustaining peace, you will search in vain to find any reference to non-proliferation, arms control, or disarmament. It's not what they're focusing on. And it's absolutely true that this could be a very important role that Canada could play. I mean, bearing in mind that 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, the veto-wielding members, are the 5 nuclear weapon states who along with 4 other they are the 5 declared nuclear weapon states, but along with the 4 others, they're all engaged in massive modernizations of nuclear weapons. And so there's a lot to talk about. But Canada, it's not in our platform, and it's reflected in the absolute lack of leadership from this government on this issue. Quite different from very active disarmament diplomacy that we have seen in the past, with the exception of the Harper conservative era. And I mean, part of the problem was the foreign minister. Foreign Minister Freeland was really the Canada-US trade minister. She was negotiating a trade deal, and foreign policy was very much a second thought, and arms control just didn't figure. So at a time when Canada's role as a NATO country was we could have done things within NATO, not least because one of the very controversial things that's happening now is the United States planning to upgrade its so-called tactical nuclear weapons. I say so-called because no arms controller believes that a nuclear weapon is just going to be tactical. The US is planning on putting new, upgraded so-called tactical nukes into the 5 NATO basing countries in Europe. And that so alarmed the National Defense Committee that in their report they had a unanimous recommendation, all party, including the Conservatives, that Canada should use its role in NATO and its credentials on arms control and disarmament to start a dialogue on NATO's nuclear policy, especially in light of the growing global discontent over the failure to make progress on nuclear disarmament. But nothing, absolutely nothing has been done on that score. The new foreign minister has been a bit more forthcoming. He is reasonably enthusiastically participated in the, had Canada participate in a very important Swedish initiative to try and get something going on nuclear disarmament. But we're a follower, not a leader in that process. And Ireland, of course, is a leading light, and Ireland is our competition here. They are a leading light in this field. They have been a leader on trying to promote pragmatic steps, trying to bring the various sides together, the blocs together, and make progress, since the inception of the UN practically. And they haven't stopped that. So yes, there's lots that Canada could do, but that would, we're back to the problem of the Trump factor. That would put them head to head with the U.S. I think I think they can do things quietly as well, but they've shown no inclination whatsoever on the arms control and disarmament front. So pretty negative, alas, answer to your question, bearing in mind when I was ambassador and for many years after, Canada was really a leading player in these areas, and that was one of the things that was so encouraging, that Canada was within NATO, but at the same time we still tried to build bridges and we tried to be constructive about moving forward with respect to nuclear disarmament. And now we're going in the opposite direction. We desperately need countries like Canada to be speaking up. The existential threat of climate change and environmental devastation, and the third one is this relentless march to nuclear Armageddon, as both Russia and the United States, for example, are actually talking about new roles for nuclear weapons. So lots we could do, but no sign that we are pledging to do it if elected to the UN Security Council.
Thank you for your great take on that. Yeah, it's very interesting that there is an opportunity for Canada to expand on that, but unfortunately, it's not a priority right now. I now have a question for both of our panelists. As a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, if elected on Wednesday, Canada has announced that it will pursue peace, climate change, economic security, gender equality, and multilateralism. Which of these policies do you think Canada needs to prioritize? And which of these commitments do you think Canada can most effectively deliver on? Adam, we'll start with you on that.
So this is a great question. I'm going to answer it in an unorthodox way. Historically, we have had experiences on the UN Security Council where we have been activists. Most specifically, our last experience on the Council, 99-2000, we had a specific agenda with 3 points that we wanted to bring forward, and we acted on all 3 and were successful on 2 of the 3. Previous to that, we came to the council without a bullet point agenda, and in some cases we were equally effective. I think that 99-2000 was exceptional. I think that the council was working just well enough during that period that there were openings for an activist delegation. I don't see that right now, and so my answer would be, which of Canada's priorities should it pursue? Whichever one opens up. In other words, we shouldn't pursue the one we think is most important. We should look for space. If there is space, we can by all means pursue it. But I think Canada should keep in mind, if it is elected, that our primary goal, our primary national interest, is that the Security Council functions effectively. If the P5, the permanent members, cooperate, it really doesn't matter what issue they're cooperating on. The fact that they're cooperating makes the entire system work more effectively. That is the real goal. The goal is to find a way to stop the council from preventing developments that are consistent with a stable world order. If that means we get our agenda pursued, great. But if it doesn't, if we can get the council to work, that's far more important.
Yes, thank you. That's it's a really, really great question. And of course, one of the things that we haven't mention, but it has to, we have to draw attention to, is the lamentable state of the UN Security Council right now. And it's really down to the United States, which will, it will not cooperate in any meaningful way. There have always been issues among the Permanent Five. There have always been problems. There have been times when China has balked. There's times when Russia has balked. Times when the United States has balked. And certainly now there are issues in which China's not cooperating and issues where Russia's not cooperating. But essentially, the United States is a dead weight at the moment. Well, not even a dead weight. They're blocking or disinterested. They're incoherent. And the Security Council could not pass a resolution on COVID because the United States insisted on it being called the Chinese virus. So the Security Council is helpless and mute in the face of a global pandemic. So yes, we have to be very realistic here about what the UN Security Council can do if Trump is not defeated in the next election. But one of the things, though, I guess I disagree a little bit with Adam about just being opportunistic, because I think, there's a rotating presidency, so you have a month where twice, because once each year of the 2-year term, you're the president, and then that means that you can put items on the agenda and you can have a debate, and you can have a debate where countries are invited in that are not part of the UN Security Council, and that's a really effective way to highlight an issue. And that, you may not get anything other than taking note of, probably wouldn't get an agreed statement, certainly a presidential statement if Trump was still around. But that's a very important way of getting important issues on the agenda. And so that's something that you need to think about ahead of time and have ready. And then the opportunistic aspect is, okay, if there's an opening, it looks like we can put this forward, we've got some ideas. But so specifically to answer the question, I would very much argue that sustaining peace should be Canada's, should be the one that we should champion on the UN Security Council. Of course, gender equality, in a way, all of the others are sort of sub-elements that can be brought in. Gender equality, we already have that as part of our peacekeeping policy. The intersection between climate change and security, the undermining of security because of climate change, the fear of wars over resources and so on. There's a big connection there. And also on the economic security side. So I think that it would be that Canada should really champion sustaining peace. And that means, of course, that we've got to pony up. We have to put our money where our mouth is. We have to lead by example. We have to really fully re-engage in peacekeeping. If we had sent that quick reaction force to Mali, we could also have brought with us some very innovative techniques. Walter Dorn, another Royal Military College professor, has written on this, methods, remote monitoring, and other technologies that could be used to help keep the peacekeepers safe. So we could have not only helped Mali, more Malian peacekeepers were killed today, and and they really, really need reinforcements of the kind that Canada can bring, the kind of equipment and training and so on. So we'd have to put our money where our mouth is, but we could do more than that. We could restart a conversation on addressing one of the real problems that the UN faces with peacekeeping missions, and that is the terrible delay in startup of the mission. From the time that the parties want help to the time that the UN can get the mission launched, once the Security Council is authorized. First of all, you've got to get the Security Council to authorize it, and that can take time. But essentially, the UN has to go cap in hand to all the troop contributing nations and say, please, please give me this, please give me that. And back a while, Canada was a champion of trying to help the UN and to have a standing brigade, headquarters brigade that Canada championed. But the time, we need something far more than that. And an initiative that Canada did put money into was UNEPS, the UN Emergency Peace Service, which essentially is a standing force. It means that instead of losing all this time while the UN cobbles together enough peacekeepers and civilians, because of course UN peacekeeping is first and foremost about implementing a peace agreement, and the military are there to support that. Getting it into the country quickly, and that may well not get agreed during Canada's term, but we could really shine a global spotlight on it. If we made that the subject of debate in our 2 rotations as president of the council, then that would be a huge contribution to really equipping the UN with what it needs. And if the American presidential campaign elects Biden as president, then we may well have a willing partner in the United States. Obama was within 1 month away of the Americans actually, for the first time since Somalia, contributing directly to a UN peacekeeping force. He didn't quite get it done before the end of his term. So there really is an opportunity for Canada to play to its strengths and really make a difference.
Thank you, Peggy, for that. I also have just one last question before we open up the panel to questions from our audience. As you all know, the vote is expected on Wednesday. If Canada loses this vote, similar to its failed 2010 campaign, what policies can Canada pursue in order to secure a seat during the next UNSC election cycle? And we'll start with Dr. Chapnick.
Okay, so if Canada loses, the interesting thing in terms of the next UNSC election cycle, I mean, we could put our name in again the day after. We could put our name in for another round today if we wanted to. So there is no real next cycle. If Canada was to put its name in again, I would recommend a period where there aren't already 2 contestants, which unfortunately would be 2030, which the government wouldn't like very much. But the real policy that Canada would need to pursue, I would suggest, is that we stop having these silly Western European and others groups contested elections. There was an attempt in the early 2010s, I believe in 2011, by one of the countries in the group to create a slate, as most of the other groups in the UN do, which says that the most powerful countries serve every 6 or 7 years and the least powerful countries serve about every 50 years. We have a rotation, which means that when it's Canada's turn, we come up against one other country. There are only 2 countries contesting. We are both elected, and we don't have to go selling our vote or asking for votes, selling votes around the world. Now, it's a whole lot easier to push that policy if you win, because then you're pushing a policy from a position of strength. If you lose, you're pushing that policy from a position of weakness. But there are others, like Finland, that have also lost elections that they were favored in the recent past that might be on side as well. And that is, to me, the real push. Win or lose, we need WEOG to find itself a way to get to a slate. We shouldn't have to ask countries that are inimical to us and to our interests to vote for us and offer them things to do so. It's silly that we outsource the decision on the Western European and other group representatives to the rest of the international community. We should find a way to stop doing that.
Okay, well, I totally agree that we all should have a slate, but it ain't gonna happen. And that's because the European Union has run more than one EU candidate. We've had elections where we are running against 2 EU candidates, which goes against every rule in the book. So the idea that they're going to agree to only one EU and then one non, I mean, that's what we've actually got now. It's just that Norway is so strong that we actually have a 1 EU and then we have Norway. Norway, of course, has its trade relationship with the EU. So, you know, it's going to get support from the EU anyway. But the trouble is, you know, it's not going to happen. And therefore, we're going to have to compete. And therefore, we're going to have to look at, you know, very carefully at who we're competing against. I do have to come in on this thing about dealing with countries that are inimical to us and buying their votes. I mean, that's not what we do. And actually, frankly, it's a bit, I find it a bit offensive to, I mean, multilateralism means dealing with all countries. If we are serious about multilateralism, and we say we are, and I believe actually Canada is, then we have to be willing to talk to all countries. And that's what the UN is all about. And whether they're inimical to our, to our beliefs or not. I mean, I would say Saudi Arabia is pretty anti-Canada's values, and I think our relationship is far too close, and we shouldn't be selling them arms that are being used in Yemen. But in terms of a Security Council campaign, what Canada does, what good countries do, is they try and appeal through, I mean, in developing countries, of course, it's foreign assistance, but that would be for things that are quite consistent with Canadian values, the kind of aid money and so on that we would, that we would be putting forward. So I don't think a contested campaign is I mean, it's bad for WEOG the way they're behaving, but I still think that a contested campaign can be a well-run campaign, and Canada can do well. I mean, what should Canada do in the meantime? Canada should focus on closing the rhetoric-reality gap. I mean, our rhetoric on multilateralism, on the UN, on international law, on global solutions for global problems is exactly what the world needs. And even the rhetoric is worthwhile, even with the huge gap. Because when we've got this attack from within, from the United States, when we've got others that look like they're backing away from the international norms, other countries doing that as well, it's really, really, really important to have that rhetoric. But what we've got to do is show that we mean it. And so that's what Canada can do in the meantime. And the other thing that we can do is we can really capitalize on the lot of interesting thinking that's going on right now in the wake of COVID, where military, all the money, the huge amount of money spent on countering a military threat, has just proven, to be utterly useless in the face of COVID. I mean, you saw, aircraft, massive, multi-million-dollar American aircraft carriers completely crippled by the fact that the sailors got COVID. And so this has really, really promoted some rethinking of security. We've done this before, our 2000 much vaunted presidency, we talked about human security and talking about how we can rethink international peace and security so that we call it, the Rideau Institute and a number of other NGOs, we call it a shift to sustainable peace and common security. And what it really is trying to get closer to what the UN Charter is all about. And it's not pie in the sky anymore. I mean, you've got conservatives like David Frum writing about now is the time to engage countries in this kind of rethinking. How can we put more money towards the threats that are really going to have to be addressed in the future? And I think there's a lot of traction there for Canada if we take that seriously. We might even have an update of the famous Brundtland report on common security, get something going on that, a global rethink of international peace and security.
Rian, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that great answer. Ms. Mason, this is now an audience question. We're now going to mention some audience questions. I have 2 to 3 ready for you guys. Ms. Mason mentioned Canada's voting record on Israel and how it might compel some Arab states to vote against Canada during this election cycle. Do you think once Canada becomes elected, if Canada becomes elected into the council, will it take a more balanced approach on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or will we see some of the same trends that we've seen before? And we'll start with Adam on that.
Okay, so Canada's traditional role on the Middle East at the Security Council, and this was particularly important in 89-90 when we were there, is that we were the barometer for what was legitimate criticism of either side and what was illegitimate criticism. What I mean by that is everyone knew that, generally speaking, Canada was a strong ally of the State of Israel and would vote with the United States. However, there was also an understanding that we didn't vote with the United States because the Americans told us to, but rather because we believed it was the right thing to do. And as a result, a couple of times at the Security Council in 89-90, we diverged from the Americans. And when we did, everyone noticed. In fact, the PLO went through Canada to figure out if they were pushing the envelope too far. We actually played an active role in mediating that conflict because everyone knew that even though we were on a side, we were less partial than the extremes on either of the sides. My sense is that the couple of recent Canadian votes where we did diverge from the Americans and created a lot of hubbub on both sides was evidence that that is the role that Canada is trying to put forward again. We are an ally of Israel. We believe that the Israelis quite often aren't in the wrong. However, if they are in the wrong, we're not afraid to diverge from the United States. If we play that role, we're actually extremely valuable as a barometer. If we simply oppose everything that Israel does or support everything that Israel does, we're useless because we're predictable. And as a result, there's no reason to deal with us because you know how we're going to vote no matter what.
Thank you for that. Peggy?
Well, I mean, I disagree with the characterization of how Canada has voted. I mean, we used to vote what we called in good company. In other words, which was not United States. So United States and Israel on one side, the vast majority was on the other. And then on resolutions, because most of the resolutions are trying to reaffirm international law. But on some resolutions where the language was particularly inflammatory or something along that line, so we didn't disagree with the international law statement, but we disagreed with the way it was stated, we would abstain in good company. And the in good company meant other like-minded, other middle power, other, the Irelands, the Norways, the Australias. It was not United States and Israel and the Marshall Islands. That is a real change that has taken place over time, where Canada has moved away from an honest broker. And we used to play a very useful role at the working group level with respect to the Middle East peace process. But little by little by little, our stated policy has stayed the same, which is strongly in support of a two-state solution and proper statement of international law. Has moved, but our actual activity to the point where we have a free trade agreement with Israel that actually has provisions which are contrary to International Security Council resolutions with respect to the treatment of goods from the occupied territories. And if we just take the example, I mean, it was very interesting. It took the last days of the Security Council campaign for the Prime Minister to actually stand up and say that Canada opposed the illegal unilateral annexation plan of the West Bank by Israel. We did have a foreign policy spokesperson who made a timid little comment on the side, but it took masses of letters, 89 diplomats, and 3 former ministers, and then a whole lot of civil society groups and Amnesty International and all sorts of groups, and media coverage, good Canadian media coverage, condemning Canada for its silence to get the Prime Minister to actually stand up and be counted on that issue. So, we can't play some kind of brokering middle ground role, but what we can on this issue, we could do useful things, and we used to be able to do useful things in the background with respect to the peace process. Now there isn't a peace process. At this stage of the game, the most important thing is to hold the line on what the international law position is, and Canada is not doing that.
Thank you for that. I have another question on China. With respect to the recent tensions between Canada and China, do you think, what will be the impact on China's vote on Canada? Will there be an impact or not? And Adam, you can start.
Well, there are 193 votes out there. Typically, the permanent 5 do not pressure other countries to vote in a certain way because they know that they have to deal with whoever is elected no matter what. As a result, there's a pretty good chance that the Chinese won't vote for Canada in this election. But that's 1 out of 193 votes, and I don't think that vote will make or break the election. The Chinese could try to pressure other countries not to vote for Canada, but they'll never know if they did or not because it's a secret ballot. So it's not worth the effort in many ways, because any country can say absolutely no problem and then just go do what they want when they get to the ballot box.
Thank you for that. Peggy?
Yes, on this one, I think we strongly agree. I mean, there's been some, media speculation, which I think is ill-founded for the reasons that Adam gave, that China is so mad at Canada over, over the extradition process with the CEO of Huawei, that, they'd be out there strong-arming various countries to try and get them to vote against Canada. And an example that's often given is African countries because of the, their big economic plan, the Belt and Road plan. But as Adam has pointed out, I mean, you're not going to know how they're going to vote. It's a secret ballot, but also on the aid calculation. Some African countries, many African countries may already, unfortunately, not be favorably disposed to us because of our very, very low aid, development assistance, overseas development assistance for African countries. Although, as I said, under COVID, we're improving that a bit. Now, in terms of the campaign, interestingly enough, one of the things that I thought that was really quite smart of the government was they got former Prime Minister and former very successful Foreign Minister, the Right Honourable Joe Clark, to be a special envoy, particularly with respect to African countries, also La Francophonie and Commonwealth. And in all three of those cases, he has excellent credentials and has kept on. I mean, he's been engaged in a great number of initiatives, leadership initiatives, and facilitation initiatives for African countries in particular. So, so I think that was an interesting thing for Canada to do, to try and beef up its vote. But bottom line, with respect to China, I agree with Adam. I don't think they're trying to pressure, they're not trying to pressure countries not to vote for Canada, even if they don't vote for Canada themselves. As Adam says, that's one vote.
Adam, I was wondering, if Canada loses the vote, what should then be the direction of our foreign policy? This is a question that has been asked repeatedly here. Is there any thinking on this, or are all of our eggs in the UNSC basket?
So I think that the Prime Minister has put the eggs of his personal brand in the Security Council basket. But I don't think that means that all of Canada's eggs are in the UN Security Council basket. I think that we continue on practicing Canadian foreign policy, whether we're on the council or not. I think that the Prime Minister will take a personal hit if we are unsuccessful, because he has made this campaign his own. This is the first time we have had a Prime Minister personally announce that Canada was a candidate for the UN Security Council. Traditionally, it's either been the Foreign Minister or a public servant who's made that statement. So the Prime Minister has made this campaign his own. There will be political consequences if we don't succeed, but that doesn't change Canadian foreign policy. Canadian foreign policy can continue as planned. There will be opportunities lost if we are not on the council. At the same time, there will be other opportunities that are gained, because we won't have to devote the resources to the council that have to be devoted if you want to make a difference when you are there.
Thank you for that. Peggy?
Yes, I agree with that as well. And I agree that there are other opportunities. I mean, interestingly, one of these 5 themes that Canada had was economic security and promoting economic equality. And that's a pretty hard thing to do on the UN Security Council. I know they tried to find examples of how they could do it, but that's not the remit. The remit of the UN Security Council is international peace and security, and there are other UN bodies that deal with, the economic issues, and they would be very, very loath to let the UN Security Council get involved in it. And so, if we're looking at promoting that kind of dialogue, trying to promote greater economic and social justice within and between countries, then that's something that would probably, take a back seat when we were in the council. So it's certainly something we could pursue if we don't get a Security Council seat. And just to reiterate what Adam said, I very strongly believe, I mean, we've got a foreign policy laid out. The chief problem of which I have is that we aren't doing enough of what we say we want to do. And not being on the council gives us, a renewed opportunity to really push that agenda and, to signal to everyone, this is why we should be elected next time round.
Thank you for that. We also have another question, and it's, where does Canada stand on the reform of the Security Council? It's a very simple question, straightforward. Adam, you can.
Okay, so we are part of a group called Uniting for Consensus that believes that the council should be expanded to 24 or 25 members, but that there shouldn't be any additional permanent members, let alone any additional permanent members with a veto. We are in favor of additional non-permanent members whose seats can be renewed. We're open to 4-year terms instead of 2, but we don't want any more permanent members. This gains us some friends, and it also costs us some votes in UN Security Council elections because the Brazilians, the Indians, among others, are strongly in favor of new permanent seats for themselves, and they are actively opposed to countries that disagree with them.
Thank you for that. Peggy?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add to that, I guess, except that, this is a very, very worthwhile endeavor, and everyone points out, and it's endlessly frustrating that the UN Security Council is so unrepresentative of the international community now, and would certainly do better with many more voices. And I think that, what Canada's supporting, the reform effort that it's proposing, I think is a very pragmatic one. I think it's a very good one. And I think there'd be an uprising generally in the international community at the thought of more vetoes. We actually had a short period, that where the permanent 5 were actually agreeing to not use their veto more and more opportunity. They weren't using it. And of course we're not there. We're right back at deadlocks all over the place. If you consider the terrible situation in Yemen, terrible conflict, humanitarian crisis, now COVID on top of it, and the UN negotiators, the UN special envoy, they are trying to negotiate, they are trying to facilitate a peace process based on a UN Security Council resolution that was passed right at the beginning of the conflict. It presupposes 2 parties, nobody else, doesn't foresee a civil war with several parties. So the negotiators are completely hamstrung in not being able to design a peace process that actually takes account of what's happening on the ground. Under normal circumstances, there'd be a new UN Security Council resolution that would recognize the situation on the ground and that would facilitate a new mandate for the negotiators. But, we can't get it. We can't get anything through the UN Security Council right now. So it's very, very useful to continue this reform process. And then hopefully there will be, and again, if the U.S. presidency changes, then there could well be a bigger opportunity to make some changes with respect to the composition of the UN Security Council. And Adam has indicated the big problem is that certain big countries that he's mentioned, and India and Brazil being among them, they want permanent seats, and they won't agree easily to something that doesn't give them a permanent seat. But that doesn't mean it isn't worth pursuing, and it doesn't mean that it couldn't even be presented as an interim step to be revisited in 10 years or whatever, so that might be a way to get those countries on board.
You mentioned Yemen, and this is a question for Adam now. Will our dealings with Saudi Arabia hurt our chances with regards to Canada's arms sales to Saudi Arabia?
Will our dealings with Saudi Arabia hurt our chances? When I wrote my book on Canada UN Security Council, and I interviewed a whole bunch of people who worked on the last few campaigns, what they said to me was that campaigning has changed so dramatically over the last 20 to 30 years. Now it is 193 separate elections where every country out there says, what have you done for me lately? So our policy towards Saudi Arabia only matters if it affects the country that we're courting for a vote. So it will probably affect a couple of votes, but it certainly won't affect a huge bulk of votes unless for some reason there is a country that steps up and launches an anti-Canada or pro-Canada campaign, and usually you would have heard about a campaign like that by now. So every one of Canada's policies matters because it will affect a vote here and there. But I don't expect you to see a massive block vote in favor or against Canada because of one particular policy. That it doesn't sound like the way elections work right now.
I
agree it's not one particular policy. The problem with the Saudi Arabia example is that it's an egregious example of a policy, of a broader policy, and that is our failure to live up to our statement about a rules-based international order and following international law. I mean, we are parties to the Arms Trade Treaty, which sets out a global standard. An article, a new 2019 report, Canada's issued a report on its arms exports for 2019, huge increase in arms exports to the Middle East, another huge increase. And it has, and the figures show, and actually there's been some recent decisions that Canada has explained, we've removed any, we had a ban on future, on new arms exports to Saudi Arabia, which was declaratory because we were acting under existing permits. And then as soon as the existing permits all ran out, then we lifted the ban on new permits. I mean, if that isn't cynical, I don't know what is. So we lifted it on Saudi Arabia, notwithstanding the fact that the UN panel of experts for Saudi Arabia have said that weapons exports to any party to the conflict exacerbates the conflict and increases the suffering of the Yemeni people. But nonetheless, we've given a total green light to arms exports to Saudi Arabia. And at the same time, we have instituted a ban on Schedule 2 military equipment to Turkey. And when Global Affairs was asked for the reasoning, they said, you know, they pointed to human rights and various issues with Turkey, well-founded issues with Turkey. And they said, and then when it was pointed out, well, why the difference between Saudi Arabia and Turkey? And certainly, I mean, Saudi Arabia is one of the most egregious human rights records there is. And Canada's answer was, well, we're working in concert with our allies. We're matching our allies. And they named several allies of Canada, European allies, who have restrictions on arms exports to Turkey. But what the article, I'm telling you, this is an article in the Globe and Mail today, but what that article didn't point out is that we're not matching our allies when it comes to arms exports to Saudi Arabia, because the majority of Western countries have either outright bans, court-ordered bans, or policy bans, or restrictive measures on exports to Saudi Arabia. And the most glaring example is Belgium, where they are not allowed to export gun turrets to Canada because those gun turrets are put on labs, which then go to Saudi Arabia. So we're not acting in concert with our allies on that. So that's a problem. That's a problem of not putting your money where your mouth is. That's a problem of double standards. And that's a problem of undercutting Western partners who are taking a more principled stand at some cost to their arms exporters on Saudi Arabia. So, you know, I don't think it's a benign thing with respect to Canada's campaign.
Thank you for that. I have, if it's okay, I can ask one more question, although our time is almost up. Is it okay? Yeah. This question, I have to paraphrase this, it's kind of long, but it's basically about Ireland and Norway. And is it even worth it for Canada to compete with these two countries who have been so pro-UN in the past and will be perhaps more pro-UN in the future? Where do you guys stand on that?
Well, I've gone first every time, so Peggy, you're welcome to take this first.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I addressed that way back at the beginning of my thing, where I said I used the diplomatic terminology. It was Canada was ill-advised to get into the race when Norway and Ireland were in the race. I mean, I think an undiplomatic way of putting it is that we were insane to do it. I mean, I really, really, really don't know what they were thinking. And then when along came, you know, they announced all of this before Trump was elected. Okay, then when Trump came along, and I know a number of senior retired diplomats made these representations to the government. At that stage, they should have realized realized that they were just going to be too hamstrung, and that they should have started talking to Ireland and Norway and to others about pulling out, but seeking, you know, their support and looking at when could we get back in later. So, you know, we could have handled it. It wouldn't have been, you know, it wouldn't have been a big loss of face at all to say, look, given the current circumstances, given the situation, you know, use diplomatic language, but we really mean south of the border. And given the very, very strong and worthwhile candidacies of Norway and Ireland, we have decided to, you know, to withdraw with a view to having active discussions on identifying, you know, a suitable time, you know, in the, you know, as early as we can find in the future.
Thank you for that. Adam?
Yeah, I'm going to go at this a little bit differently. I mean, I've been open that I don't think choosing 2021-22 was the right move. I think it was a political move, and it was disappointing to me. But I'm very much in favor of Canada serving on the Security Council, and I actually think that Canada would most likely be more effective than the other countries right now. And the reason I think that is that the Council has grown so big and so busy that it is very difficult for any country of 5-ish million people to staff the Council sufficiently to attend every meeting and contribute actively at every table. Even the Australians who were on the Council recently seconded a Canadian from Global Affairs, then Foreign Affairs and International Trade and Development, to their delegation to augment it, because it is so hard for non-great powers to beef up their foreign affairs departments enough to attend every meeting and be prepared for them all with people who can actually make decisions. You can always throw a body at a meeting, but to have someone who can actually make decisions, it's difficult. A country of almost 40 million people can do that much more effectively than countries of 5 million people. And the challenge when you're understaffed is you get run over by the P5. So I think there would be very great value for having Canada there, even if we're going to contribute similarly to the other two, just because we could be at more tables better prepared than they can.
Well, thank you for that. And
Nobody
with that,
runs over Ireland.
Yeah. And with that, I would like to thank our panelists and our audience for taking the time today to watch our discussion. The recording of this conversation will soon be uploaded on our website at peacediplomacy.org. And please feel free to share this panel once it's up online. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.